1999. A boy lies in a hospital bed after a disturbing psychological episode. He confides in his therapist and tells him his biggest secret.
I see dead people.
He sees them everywhere, all the time, walking around like regular people. And they don't even know they're dead. The turn of the 21st century saw two incredible supernatural ghost movies. Both took the classic haunted house tropes, but flipped them on their heads, leaving audiences questioning who was dead and who wasn't, who was being haunted and who was doing the haunting. These two movies, very different in their style and execution, both became instant timeless classics, and one of them went on to become the biggest grossing horror movie of all time. It seemed that low-key, subtle, supernatural horror was back.
You're mad. I am your daughter.
Join me as we continue exploring the evolution of the ghost story as we review Alejandro Amenabar's The Others and M. Night Shyamalan's The Sixth Sense.
Why are you crying, children? What happened in this room?
Welcome back to the Evolution of Horror. My name is Mike, and as ever, I am your host. If you're joining us for the first time, then welcome. In this podcast, we explore and dissect the evolution of the horror genre by looking at particular subgenres across a number of weeks. We are currently in the midst of exploring the evolution of the ghost story, and this is part 14, in which, as the intro suggested, we're going to be covering The Sixth Sense and The Others back to back in spoilerific detail. Now, these two movies in particular, it's so important that you've seen them before you listen to spoilers, because these movies rely on their twists. So if you haven't seen them, please go away and watch these movies. I mean, I very much doubt there's anyone out there who hasn't seen The Sixth Sense or knows what happens at the end of The Sixth Sense. But just in case, please do yourself a favour, go and check out these two gems and come back to us. Now, before we get started, here are a few contact details. You can email us. The email address is evolutionofhorror@gmail.com. You can find us on Twitter, that's @evolutionpod, or on Facebook, that's facebook.com/evolutionofhorror. There is also a discussion group, that's the Evolution of Horror discussion group, where you can join to discuss the movies and the podcast with other listeners. That can be found on Facebook. And you can now subscribe to us on Letterboxd. That's where we constantly update a list of what movies we're going to be covering this series so that you can watch them in advance and keep up to date. That's letterboxd.com/evolutionpod. There's only a few weeks left of the Ghost series. We're coming near the end. Then there's going to be a short break and we're going to come back with a new series in the summer. And if you want to find out what we're going to be covering for the next series of the Evolution of Horror, then please do follow us on all those social media channels. That's where you're going to be the first to find out what we're going to be covering next and what films you should check out. But for now, let's carry on with our journey through the evolution of ghosts, and let's get started. This week, joining me to discuss The Sixth Sense and The Others is someone I've been looking forward to having on the podcast for a very long time. Interestingly, he's not the biggest horror movie fan in the world, so this could be interesting. It is my great pleasure to introduce Henry Barnes. Henry, hello.
Hi, Mike.
Hi. So this is a weird one for me because you are pretty much my boss, in effect. But just tell people listening, other than being my boss, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
So I'm Henry Barnes. I'm an ex-Guardian film journalist, and now I work at the BFI, where I'm essentially responsible for creating and commissioning video and audio content for the BFI's website. So that will be based on anything that we're doing at the South Bank in terms of events, interviewing people who show up, or doing the odd video essay type stuff.
Yeah, very cool. And you did for quite a while when you were at the Guardian podcast as well, didn't you?
I did,
Which was great. I mean, that was my staple every week. Listen to that. Listen to
you. Have to say that
because
I'm almost your boss. Yeah.
That's right. I do have to say that. Yeah. So tell me a little bit about what are your thoughts on the horror genre? What's your relationship been like throughout your life with the horror genre?
So I'm not a horror fan. I've really enjoyed listening to your podcast because in a way it's an education for me as someone who is a complete noob to the genre. But also I have a kind of very visceral disgust, I think, about a lot of horror.
Do you?
And that's probably rooted in a snobbery that horror is often working in a place where it's cynically trying to tweak parts of my psyche and my emotions.
Yeah.
That I know that I'm a like I'm an animal at my core. I know there are things like loud noises or sudden things like scary ladies popping up on a cinema screen that are going to scare the shit out of me. And I kind of resent a filmmaker for using those tricks.
Right.
When, of course, good horror is using those tricks in ways that are less expected or less calculated than the kind of standard tropes. So I'm gently working my way into finding a place that I like within the genre, I think. So,
nice. I think also when you're, because I've spoken about this to a lot of film critics, and you know, you guys who have to, you know, watch everything that comes out on a weekly basis, especially when you were at the Guardian and all that kind of thing, you know, like that. You must just see so much more bad than good as well. That's the problem, isn't it?
Yeah, and there are established rules to the genre in a way that something, I guess the closest cousin is something like comedy, where you can tell a cheap gag, it'll get a laugh, but it's almost cynically done because you know that because you're talking about dicks, you're going to get a joke, get a laugh out of it. Same with horror, right? With a jump scare, you know you're going to make people literally physically react to what you're doing, but that doesn't mean that actually what you've done includes any skill, really. It's just throwing the volume at it. So.
Yeah, true. But do you agree then? Are you one of these people that thinks that genre is in some way worse then than, I don't know what you'd call it, kind of art house movies, or, you know?
I don't know. I mean, it's a blend, right? I mean, I love a genre film. I'm not snobby about that. I am interested in modern genre films doing something that is different or tweaks that genre for me a little bit and makes it like, you know, the example that everyone uses at the moment is Get Out, which does do that. It brings in elements of race politics and the current political climate, and that is brilliantly done. I mean,
and still a horror film,
still scary. And another problem with horror as a genre for me slightly is that the more traditional monster movie, for example, it's very difficult for any director to show you the monster and then to keep it terrifying afterwards, and you have to plan that reveal so carefully that I'm constantly thinking, when is the reveal coming? So I'm not really concentrating on the feeling of the film. Whereas something like, for example, The Shining, the image of the two little girls is far scarier for me than any of the gore or the lady in the bathtub in that film, and that's drilled into my psyche. It's not to do with the kind of what I'm seeing on screen, it's to do with the fears that I have as a human being and an animal underneath that.
Well, let's get started on these movies then. So, you know, first of all, I think let's start with The Sixth Sense. And we talked about, so far on this series, we've sort of talked about how, you know, they sort of started with these sort of ghost stories. You know, the kind of the big boom started in the early 60s with things like The Haunting and The Innocents and stuff like that. And then there was a kind of big tradition of British ghost films through the 70s, sort of TV ghost stories from the BBC and that kind of stuff that were huge. And then sort of Hollywood kind of got onto this in the sort of late 70s and 80s, and you got, you know, Tobe Hooper's Poltergeist, Spielberg, you know, Kubrick's The Shining, you got the Amityville Horror, The Changeling, The Fog, John Carpenter. There was this kind of big wave of them. And then I think that kind of got replaced by gore stuff. You know, through the 80s and into the 90s, it was all about the slashers and everything. But I think you know, I was talking to Kevin Lyons from the BFI, and he was telling me that he thinks that maybe, you know, fears of things like the Millennium Bug or whatever, you know, towards the late 90s, suddenly there was this kind of wave again of kind of ghost stories and stripped back, you know, they got rid of the gore, and it was all about the kind of the suspense and the tension and that kind of thing, and it became more character based again. I mean, do you have any idea, any theories as to why you think that might have happened? I mean,
not me to be a cultural anthropologist.
Yeah. I know.
I guess, you know, stereotypically the 80s is a surface genre, right?
Yeah.
Like, we were about accumulation, we were about material, we were about showing off what you have.
Yeah.
And there wasn't, you know, as speaking as someone who was born in the early 80s, so didn't really experience it properly, there didn't feel like there was that sense of, let's be particularly thoughtful about the times that we're living in, from the vast majority of pop culture at least.
Yeah.
And I wonder if the kind of spate of 90s twist movies, so not just in horror, but things like, you know, your Fight Clubs or The Usual Suspects, all that kind of thing, is a reaction against that. Like this idea that let's rethink the surface of what you're looking at, and let's try and see if there's a deeper angle to it. And more importantly, what happens if the surface is lying to you, both as a character and the audience? And that's why these films are great, right? It's because they bear repeat viewings, because they invite more than one reading from the start. It's particularly with Fincher's films, but in the horror genre as well, there is no set way that you're supposed to see these films, even after seeing them the second time, because then you can go back and try and watch them as if you didn't know the twist at the end.
Yeah.
Which is really challenging to do, particularly with The Sixth Sense, because you see the bloopers everywhere,
Absolutely.
if you like, after seeing it.
Yeah.
But there's definitely there was a kind of thoughtfulness and intelligence to this form of mainstream cinema, which interestingly enough seems to be on the wane again now.
Yeah.
In that it's a massive risk to make this kind of film, to rely on your audience sticking through to the end, appreciating the twist, and then hopefully going back to watch the film again.
Yeah.
For some reason, we don't seem to trust the audience to do that anymore. And for me, that would probably be because it's about concentration span and the idea that the internet has essentially destroyed what concentration span we had coming into the noughties for a lot of us.
Yeah.
Those of us who spend all day staring at a computer screen anyway.
Yeah.
Like a compact 90 minutes at most when it comes to films. And even then we're drifting and we're looking at a second screen whilst we're doing that.
Yeah.
You know, so I guess the kind of intellectual fibre of our culture is dissipated a little bit. And film is reflecting that, at least in my view.
Yeah, definitely. And, you know, after I think it was like this little microcosm in a way, because it was the sort of late 90s. It might have started with things like Japanese cinema, like Ring and The Grudge that came out in the late 90s. And then I think post 9/11, everything went quite brutal again. It was kind of like, let's shock people. What can we push more, push further? But there was this little microcosm of like this sort of mini wave of ghost movies at the turn of the millennium. So it's interesting.
I see dead people walking around like regular people.
I don't see anything. Are you sure they're there?
Sometimes you feel it inside, like you're falling down real fast. You ever feel the prickly things on the back of your neck?
Yes.
That's them. They get mad. It gets cold.
How often do you see them?
All the time. They're everywhere.
Bruce Willis plays a child psychotherapist called Malcolm. You see him get shot in the opening scene where he's spending time with his wife by a former patient of his. And we spend the rest of the film with him and a young boy called Cole, who it turns out can see dead people. The twist is that one of the dead people that Cole can see is Bruce Willis's character, Malcolm. So Malcolm has been dead throughout the whole film, and he, in the course of him thinking that he's helping Cole to work through his issues, he's actually helping himself as a ghost work through the issues that he needed to complete before he could ascend to wherever or descend to wherever.
Yeah.
Which it sounds awfully cheesy, but it's not cheesy at all. It's actually, I mean, I was stunned watching this film again. It has been a good 10 years since I watched it.
Right, yeah.
How much the quality of this film stands up. You know, because there is, with this particular director, he's kind of become a parody of himself in a way, and people tend to think that all of his films are cheesy nonsense now or forcefully twisty.
Yeah.
Actually, The Sixth Sense is a brilliantly paced, well-written, expertly shot and beautifully toned film that still holds that suspense throughout. And even when you know that Bruce Willis's character is dead, there is an element of tension to it still.
Absolutely.
Because you're constantly looking for these pointers, and they're not. I said earlier that they're kind of few bloopers, and there are a few of those people kind of staring at him when he's not actually supposed to be there, all that kind of stuff, and you're very heightened and looking for those. But they're not that obvious. It really can be read two ways at once, which makes it a really interesting, strange film, and amazing that it did so well commercially as well. After kind of shoddy reviews.
It's a tricky film, I think. You're totally right. Like, it's masterfully made, but I think it has a reputation now. It has a bad rep, I think. Maybe it's because of M. Night Shyamalan, but also maybe because everyone knows that twist now. That's the thing. But like, do you remember the first time you watched it? Do you remember what that situation was? Did you see it when it first came out? Or I
think I saw it at the cinema, but I would have seen it because it was one of those things when you were at school where people almost, and a friend was telling me about this the other day, almost like a prank. People would come up to you and say, "Have you seen The Sixth Sense?" You'd say no, and they'd immediately spoil it for you, which is the equivalent of, I don't know, spoiling the first new Star Wars film. Which I did for somebody. Sorry, Ben.
Oh no.
But so there was an element of, you need to see this because it's a cultural touchstone now, because of the spoiler or because of the twist, which is amazing in itself, right? It actually doesn't ruin the movie to go into it knowing the twist, which is strange.
Well, interesting. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I thought I had the same thing as you. Like, I was too young to see it at the time when it came out. So, but I watched it on DVD, and I knew by then that there was a twist. I just didn't know what it was. But when you know and you look for it, that's the thing. And I think it got to the scene where they were in the restaurant, and she ignores him, and she gets the bill, And I remember I was like 11 and I went, oh, he's dead, you know, and it's such a shame. But you're right, it doesn't really ruin the film for you. But I keep thinking, God, how good would that be if you did go see it knowing nothing, knowing that there was, not knowing that there was a twist. I guess must have been amazing.
Well, I was watching it with my girlfriend last night again, and we kind of realised that there's another angle to it in terms of like, if you look at it from a gender point of view, it's like a man goes to his anniversary dinner, his wife doesn't talk to him, he gets in a kind of huff and leaves. It's like, well, he could not be dead. He could actually be there anyway.
Absolutely.
I don't think that the director was trying to say that at that time in our culture, but there probably is. The modern reading would probably be like, how hopeless are men, that they miss all these emotional cues.
Totally.
They miss the fact that the woman's barely looking at him half the time, and that she's sad and depressed, not because he's acting badly or because he's buried in his work, but because he's been dead for the better part of a year.
I know. And he's just droning on about his own problems.
Yeah, totally.
Never once asks her a question.
And he's still obsessed with his work, which was the problem that the film throws up at the start. She says, you don't put anything before your work, even me.
Yeah,
and he says at the end, I do. You were always first. You were never second. It's like, no, actually, she was second all the way through, mate. Even after you died.
Yeah.
You failed me. You failed me! Vincent, I'm sorry if I didn't help you. But if you just let me try, you just give me a chance.
So let's start from the beginning. I mean, that opening scene to me was absolutely, truly horrific. And it scared me again, rewatching it even. Just the way that Shyamalan kind of plays with the point of view. And, when they go up and they see that the window's been smashed and you kind of... He's very good, actually. And obviously he gained that reputation, didn't he, straight away as being like the new Hitchcock or whatever, which is a bit silly. But, he's very good at kind of controlling point of view and building suspense, actually. It seems like...
Yeah, his shot selection there is really conservative in an interesting way. It's really sparse. And then there's the scene that stays with me is when his former patient shoots Malcolm and then kills himself. You never actually see him kill himself.
No.
Like the camera pans past the doorway and you just see the gun go up to his head and then the noise of the gunfire. Things like that. It was really like a classy bit of filmmaking which you wouldn't have expected from a so-called genre picture. I mean, and that's for me is part of its genius as well, is that it changes. It changes from a kind of procedural, almost like medical thriller to a kind of almost elements of a buddy movie between Cole and Malcolm there. And then there is the kind of pure horror stuff of when Cole starts seeing the first few dead people. Those are sold to us, the audience, as genuinely terrifying moments. We don't see the typical way that the director would show you the ghost is that you'll see them as a normal person. They'll turn around and they've got something hideous that's happened to their face to show how they died, or the back of their head's blown out or something like that. And that becomes a bit trite after a while. Actually, you see it so many times. But in the first couple of instances, they are genuinely terrifying moments. And then it's a switch again to almost a kind of reconciliation / love story where Cole starts to talk to the ghost as if they're human beings who have real concerns, and then you realize this is more of a kind of drama really rather than a horror. So it goes through all of those graduations really smoothly, really well, in the same way that Hitchcock would have done as well, I guess. And that's where that is earned, that comparison. It's that they all seem to lead into each other, and there's none of them, apart from slightly the kind of horror element of it, is overplayed too much. I think that's part of the reason again why I really enjoyed it watching again this far down the line.
I think you're right. And in that opening, like you say, it is very maturely directed. Again, you'd expect now in this day and age maybe if that guy was in the bathroom standing there in his pants, that would be some sort of jump scare or something. Totally. But it doesn't. It's like he slowly kind of approaches the bathroom, Bruce Willis, and it just sort of slowly reveals him standing there, doesn't it? Again, and that to me sends so much more of a sort of chill down my spine as well watching it.
Do you know why you're afraid when you're alone? I do.
What do you want?
What he promised me! What would he promise?
Oh my God.
I think that's the thing. Like, and I've heard a lot of people say this, and I think it's true that he's a much better director than he is a writer. That's the thing. That's where his films fall down, especially in the later ones. Is the stories, the characters, is the twist, But actually, he's very good at that kind of very basic, directing and suspense and that kind of thing. Let's talk about the performances quickly as well. I mean, Bruce Willis. This was again, I think, quite a new. This was a new direction for Bruce Willis at this point in the 90s, wasn't it?
Yeah. Back when Bruce Willis cared.
Yeah.
When he cared, or one of the periods when he cared. Yeah. Was this, forgive me, this was pre or post Pulp Fiction?
Post. It was a few years after Pulp Fiction.
It's a good run round there, isn't it?
He had a great 90. Basically, from Die Hard onwards, he did pretty well. Up until about Unbreakable, I suppose.
I mean, Bruce Willis is good in this. Don't get me wrong, but he's actually playing the easiest part of the lot. He's playing the questioner, the man who comes to discover and show the world to the audience.
Yeah.
Haley Joel Osment in this is incredible, and I forgot how good he is as a kid actor. At times there's 7 different emotions going through the kid's face all at once, and he's brilliant. He's got this kind of spunky friendliness to him. He's got this terror. Obviously, he plays the feeling of someone who is completely terrified through most of their life so well.
Yeah.
And you can sense that, you can feel that in this kid.
If you're not very mad, can I sleep in your bed tonight?
Look at my face. I'm not very mad.
Yeah.
He's got Toni Collette as his mum, and
she's
always
that's
great.
Performance of the film for me.
She's brilliant.
Unbelievable.
She's brilliant.
Yeah.
It's so weird with that part because we were watching it and thinking, this part is basically the Marissa Tomei part, right? You get Toni Collette or Marissa Tomei. I looked on Wikipedia today, and originally Marissa Tomei was going to play that role of Cole's mum. So it's a great ensemble piece because of that, and I think those 3 key roles really work well together as well.
They do.
And none of them are overplayed. Like Haley Joel Osment, it'd be so easy, particularly nowadays, like you were saying with the mental patient. I think they would force that performance. They would make it terrified, shivering kid crying, wetting himself, doing the whole works, and like lots of crash zooms into his face, but there's a way that they've directed him that just keeps it steady and keeps it understandable and keeps it relatable, I guess.
I think and again, like that was a big talked about thing as much as the twist. It was Haley Joel Osment and his performance, and I remember that, and he was nominated for an Oscar for it and everything, and then I think again with him the tide turned the other way where people kind of got sniffy about it or kind of took the piss or something, this sort of precocious performance. But actually it's not that precocious. Like you say, he again, I was kind of surprised at how many genuine kind of child moments there are in him, and you believe him as this little boy. That's the thing.
And a weird sassiness to him on occasion as well. Like there's a bit in the church where Malcolm and Cole are talking at different levels, and Cole's up on the upper layer of the church playing with his toy soldiers, and Malcolm is walking along the aisle below.
Noticed your eyeglasses. They don't have any lenses in them.
They're my dad's. The lenses hurt my eyes.
What were you talking about with your soldiers when I came in? De
profundis clamo ad te domine. It's called Latin.
And Cole, it's almost like a kind of like a screwball comedy feel to it. There's sort of a knockabout vibe between the two of them, which, considering he is a 10-year-old boy and Bruce Willis is a man, he's dead, but still a grown man. It's quite a strange power dynamic at that point. But again, he sells it really well. You feel like he's world weary, like he's literally seen all of these lifetimes pass in front of his eyes and has to be subjected to something that is terrifying and scaring him every single day of his life. And that, how do you play that as an adult, let alone as a kid? I just think it's a remarkable performance. It really is.
It is amazing. It's fantastic.
I see dead people.
In your dreams? While you're awake?
And, again, the thing that struck me as well, if you didn't know that this was a ghost movie, I think it's about nearly an hour in before he says, "Can I tell you a secret? I see dead people." And until then, we've not seen any dead people, have we? And it's literally, like you say, that's the turning point. And it's only after he's admitted it that we start seeing the ghosts as well.
It's all set up. And that's brilliantly done as well. And it's not, we'll talk about the others in a bit. For me, the first hour of the others is hard work. It's quite a slow, gradual passing out of these tokens to you. Like you're going to get pieces and pieces of the world, and you're going to take your time to build it up for yourself. Whereas The Sixth Sense just slowly but carefully gives you enough every 5 minutes to keep you interested, and to keep you wondering who Bruce is, who Haley Joel Osment's character is, and they just keep handing you these more substantial nuggets, I guess, of interest, and there's little areas of terror in there. But you're right, it's not until within about an hour in that the real kind of horror kicks in.
I think what's so interesting about this movie is, we touched on it already, but it's the way that the tone kind of shifts as the story shifts and as those reveals slowly come. So as you say, it's like it's halfway through before we find out it is a ghost movie, essentially. And that's that terrifying moment when Cole gets up in the night to go to the toilet. We see him sort of having a wee, and then this presence just walk past him, behind him. And again, Shyamalan, he's really very good at kind of controlling the point of view and building suspense here. We have that kind of handheld shot as he slowly walks down that long corridor towards the kitchen, and we get the reveal of, first of all, what we think is his mother, and then she turns round and it's this woman with cut wrists, and she's sort of screaming manically at him, and she's opened every single cupboard in the kitchen, and it's just quite a creepy, chilling image.
Mama?
No. Dinner is not ready. What are you gonna do? You can't hurt me anymore! Lenny, you're a terrible husband, Lenny! Look what you made me do! Lenny!
And again, you've got that moment there where he runs back into his tent, into his safe place, and the camera kind of follows him very quickly as it goes all the way along into the tent, as if he's being chased. And it's a really terrifying moment when actually very little happens. He walks in, he sees this woman, and he leaves again. But Shyamalan does it in a way that it is terrifying, and it's been built up and built up and built up.
Hey, come on. I'll show you where my dad keeps his gun. Come on.
It's interesting because there's a shift. There's a shift between them being ghostly apparitions that you're supposed to be terrified by, and then you are, with Cole, supposed to gradually get used to seeing those things.
Yes.
And therefore, by the end of the film, feel almost friendly towards them and sympathetic towards these ghostly characters who have died in often horrific ways.
Yeah.
I'm sorry about that, Vincent. I hope I didn't leave you alone too long. It's cold in here.
There's that brilliant moment as well where Bruce Willis's character is listening to his session tapes, his therapy tapes, and he listens to his old session that he had with the little boy who was the man that shot him at the beginning. And again, it's a moment that's lifted straight out of movies like The Changeling. We actually discussed this in the Changeling episode. It's one of the most chilling moments in that movie, where Bruce Willis listens to the tape, he turns up the volume as high as it will go, you hear that kind of very loud hiss, and in the background you hear this voice, this whispering voice, this other person in the room.
Yo no quiero morir en este lugar, Señor. Sálvame. Sálvame, Señor. Yo no quiero morir. Oh my God. Yo no quiero morir.
And that's when Bruce Willis realises, okay, Cole is telling the truth. There is something else. There is something paranormal. And again, as these two characters discover more about the ghosts and about themselves, the mood slowly and gradually changes, and it stops being this terrifying, jumpy horror movie and then becomes this very sad, melancholic movie about loss. And so you really go on this kind of big emotional journey from sort of mystery to horror to drama, and it just does it so seamlessly.
I'm feeling much better now.
The little girl in the tent still made me jump.
Played by Misha Barton
Yes.
from the OC. But yeah, she's the first one that Cole starts to talk to as if she was still a human being, essentially, and that she has agency and drive, and she's not just a monster. She is somebody who needs approached to in a kind of Guillermo del Toro way, I guess. Like, she's a monster that has heart, and you need to understand. And that's finally when the dawn breaks on the film and you start to see it in a whole new light. But yeah, before that, there is a bit too much of the screeching women and damaged souls stuff that it can get a bit much. But that's the one fault I have against the film.
Yeah. And like you say, it kind of works with the journey he goes on, where he is absolutely terrified of them to begin with until he accepts it. And so you kind of go on that journey with him, I suppose, which is nice. And there's that whole other little arc that I always forget about with the parents poisoning the kid, and
Yeah.
like that. What? Every time I forget that that's even there in that
nutty.
film. It is a bit nutty. Yeah, it's dark, and I suppose it's all part of his arc, isn't it? Again, of kind of coming to terms with this is what he has to overcome and achieve and everything. But yeah, I always forget that's even part of that movie. It's really
So just
weird.
to explain that very briefly,
Yeah.
that's Misha Barton's character. It turns out that she was being poisoned by her, I believe it's her stepmom, you're supposed to
it,
think. It's
yes.
kind of fairy tale thing. The dad didn't know this, but Cole's mission to help the ghost is to uncover this videotape
Yes.
that he then shows to the dad at the wake. And you see her pouring some sort of cleaning agent into the girl's soup and tells her to drink up. And then the stepmom gets her comeuppance, or perceived comeuppance through that. I don't know.
Still.
It's kind of, it's a bit of, it's like a bit of a crowbar in there in terms of let's bring this twist in and then make that the launch pad for the rest of the movie. There's probably a more subtle way that he could have done it. But again, as we said, he's more of a director than a writer. So
and this movie did hit mainstream audiences.
Yeah.
Everyone loved it, didn't they?
They'll fix it in the remake.
Yeah,
So don't worry, right?
they will. Yeah, exactly. And there are other moments that are, very creepy as well when it's a little bit more restrained. I can't remember if this is before or after we find out about the ghost, but when he is locked in the cupboard at the party by the bullies, that is a really chilling moment as well.
Yeah.
We don't have to see anything there, which is what's quite
No,
nice.
you don't. And there's almost an element of kind of Polanski-ish kind of just physical body horror and psychological terror in there, just from a setup of a kid being locked in a cupboard.
Yeah.
Let me tell you, I was locked in a cupboard by my mum when I was 8.
No.
No, even older than that, as a teenager, I think. And I was terrified. I ended up kicking the door off the hinges.
Oh
So
my God.
It happens to the best of us. And I
There you
don't see
go.
dead people. So,
Oh, this is like a therapy session. This
Yeah.
podcast. This is nice.
like all podcasts
Yeah.
now, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So obviously, let's talk briefly about the twist. I mean, when you watch the movie again, so in your opinion, it still holds up, even if you know he's dead.
Yeah, it does. It does. Partly because you're playing the game called Can I Tell That Bruce Willis Is Dead in this
Yeah.
film? But also because I just think it does that procedural thing really well, as I've said David Fincher's films do, of just taking you through the steps really carefully.
Yeah.
Or even something like the new Blade Runner film. It feels like a detective story that takes you logically from step to step to step.
Yeah.
And there's no bit that doesn't really make much sense. Some of it's overblown, as we've already talked about. But for the majority of it, you realise why you're going from step to step.
Yeah.
And then with the twist, he changes the rules on you. And as a good twist should, obviously. But you're not just questioning a character. You're left questioning the whole fabric of the movie that you've just seen, which is quite a trick to pull on your audience and could really, and I think it did, piss a few people off.
Yeah.
Because you've gained that trust and you've betrayed it almost absolutely by the end of the film.
Yeah.
But the way that he does it isn't too showy. It's not too drum roll, please, here's your big twist ending.
No, not at all.
For him, at
actually.
least. Yeah. It's fairly subtly done.
It
you
is.
do
Isn't it?
come
What is
up
that? Basically, a ring drops onto a floor,
Yeah.
and then you kind of clock, don't you?
So he feeds you clues all the way. He says that dead people can't see other dead people. They
Yes.
only see what they want to see. Haley Joel Osment's character tells us that the temperature drops when he sees the apparitions.
Yeah.
So his wife, Malcolm's wife, is lying on the sofa watching a wedding video that you've seen her watch a fair few times before of their happy day. And then you suddenly realise that temperatures drop because her breast starts to form. And again, like for cinema, a great visual way of showing the conditions that you've set up for somebody. She then drops Malcolm's wedding ring on the floor. Malcolm realises he's not wearing it. She's wearing hers, but he isn't. And from that point, you start to get flashbacks of things that Cole has said to Malcolm that might suggest that he's been dead all along. And then you get the reveal of his gunshot wound, which is still on his back. Every dead person we've seen to that point has a physical sign that
wound.
they've been killed. His is on his back, so he wouldn't have seen it, which is a little, it's bleeding, so it's a little unrealistic. But so the revelation is really subtly done, and Bruce Willis, to his credit, plays it quite subtly as well. It's not kind of gasping, shouting, crying. It's more, I guess, a kind of acceptance of what he knew all along.
Yeah, it's that realisation, then acceptance, and then it's this kind of emotional goodbye, isn't it? Sort of thing.
The key to it all, I think, is that goodbye is 30 seconds of screen time.
Yeah.
It's very brief. It's Bruce Willis essentially saying, I loved you all along.
Yeah.
You were never second to my work, which is a lie. But I love you and I've got to go now to somewhere else. Again, cornball stuff, but the thing that we've probably earned after 2 hours of intense psychological
Absolutely.
Yeah, but it's not overwrought at that point. It feels like he knows that he's done his work and he's just got to finish the film and get on with it.
And I think the best ghost movies are are that, and that's why there's an argument that they're not always just pure horror, but the ghost movies in particular have this kind of, they often deal with obviously loss and death and memory and looking back to the past, and there's always this kind of melancholy to them, I suppose, as well as the fear. It needs that emotion as well.
Well, I'm trying to think of films that once they give you the twist run on for that much longer, and there aren't many of them unless they have multiple twists. I think the one that did it well, particularly for me recently, was The Cabin in the Woods.
Yeah, what brilliant.
Which was a brilliant film, but arch and sarcastic and wry in a way that this film definitely isn't. No. And, Joss Whedon, it wasn't Joss Whedon, was it?
Well, Joss Whedon wrote it. Yeah, and Drew Goddard, I think, directed it.
Drew Goddard, and I love that film because they were being dicks, basically. Yeah. They were kind of playing with your perception of what that kind of film should be, taking the piss out of the teen cabin genre thing and the isolation horror, but then made a salient point about how those films usually work and why afterwards for a good 45 minutes. Yeah. And that sustained itself.
Yeah, so the twist is the last act of the film.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's hard work to keep that energy up and to end with Armageddon. So spoilers for that film. So good. But it's brilliantly done, that film. But most films with this kind of twist, I say, as the rest of this director's back catalogue shows, tend to wither if you hang around too long after you've given the twist to people.
And it's all about, is that film still good and entertaining despite the twist, isn't it? Watching it again, can you still enjoy it for what it is? Which you can, but maybe that's again the problem going forward with the rest of his movies, is that he says that he never intended to be that guy who put twists in everything, or he never felt like he had to put a twist at the end of his movies. That was just how he liked telling stories, or that was what suited that particular story he was telling. But it does feel like the more you get into it, Unbreakable and Signs, and then The Village especially, it feels like he's shoehorning twists in, I think.
I mean, obviously there'll be commercial pressures behind that as well. Yes. You know that as an audience, maybe if you're going to go see one of his films, you're looking forward to a twist, which is interesting because it changes how you watch the films, as we've realised watching The Sixth Sense the second time. Yeah. So, I don't know how he got around that, really. I don't think he could. He has to be that guy that people expect him to be. Yeah. I guess then you make The Last Airbender and just disappoint people from the off.
And he really hit rock bottom, didn't he? He had this absolute rise and then fall. Yeah. And I think people are starting to forgive him again. And actually, it's interesting because he went and did that film, The Visit, which wasn't particularly good, that found footage film. But he was stripped. He had to start back almost from zero again, it felt like that. That was a Blumhouse movie. I think he was given a $1 million budget, which for a big film like that, I suppose, is quite small. And I think suddenly it was like he'd had his fall from grace and he had to work from the bottom again. Yeah. And do a kind of low budget horror, and he's starting to kind of reboot himself a little bit, I think, which is nice.
The Blumhouse thing is interesting as well, right? Because he was making those films way before they were even thinking of that business model. And
before they were giving him Last Airbender budgets and stuff,
And The Sixth Sense, made 10 times its budget at least. It did astonishingly well at the box office. And that's the kind of numbers that everybody's looking for, but Blumhouse particularly with that model that they've developed. And so it seems like a perfect fit that they're kind of working together now. I guess it's a fall from grace for him, but it's a fall from grace to his natural home. Yeah. You see what I mean?
And what's really interesting is, everyone's saying that it is the biggest grossing horror movie of all time. But actually, The Sixth Sense is bigger. It's grossed more money, but it's not considered a horror film, so therefore it's not. Right. I think on whatever website, Box Office Mojo or something, they you can look at the biggest grossing horror movies, and there was loads of articles written about it's become the biggest ever, but of course it's not. And I saw a lot of people tweeting going, no, it's not, because The Sixth Sense is, and that is a horror film. But it's interesting because a lot of people, like we say, don't class it as a horror film, and that is the biggest grossing horror movie of all time still. The Sixth Sense. So.
I think a lot of people have the unfair view that I have, that it's too intellectually complex to be a pure horror, which is bullshit, and I know it. Terrible. But that is that's my instinctive reaction.
You ever feel the prickly things on the back of your neck?
Yes.
And the tiny hairs on your arm, when they stand up.
Yes.
That's them. When they get mad. It gets cold.
So, I mean, you'd still recommend The Sixth Sense then,
Absolutely, yeah. Really, I mean, It's an element of nostalgia as well, right?
Yes.
Because I was very impressionable at that age.
But-
it's one of the first experiences of going to the cinema, probably,
Yeah,
for me.
yeah,
and
yeah,
so, you know, to feel that somebody could do that with
Yeah.
storytelling. I don't think I'd read books that did that at that point, or
Yeah.
listened to music that changed that radically halfway through a song.
Yeah,
Maybe a couple
absolutely.
of Blur tracks, but not like. But yeah, there is an element of it being, for our generation at least, one of the formative cinematic experiences you
Yeah,
have.
absolutely.
And that's a positive thing. I really think it is. You know, it's going to introduce you to better, bigger things.
Yeah.
Probably, but it's a great filter through which you can see that cinema.
Definitely. And I think it was, you know, I was sort of 11, 12, and I think it was when I started to grasp the idea of the director, the auteur. You know, like suddenly I would be wanting to go and see, not for long, but, you know, the next M. Night Shyamalan film because it was the next M. Night Shyamalan film and that kind of thing. So, yeah, I mean, it's great.
Suddenly you were insisting on Final Cut on all of your work.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, do you still think it holds up? 18 years old now? It doesn't feel dated at all to me, actually.
Not really,
No. And again, I suppose that's because it holds back. You know, the movies that date, especially horror movies, are the ones that use a lot of effects or whatever else, blood, guts, gore, practical effects, CGI. And that, again, it's a thing with the ghost stories where they don't age. They feel more timeless somehow.
Yeah, I mean, you know, you can still read Wilkie Collins now,
Mm-hmm.
and there are things that you can take from that are still stunning, terrifying,
Yeah.
you know, interesting, compelling, but other adjectives. But I do think there was something in the water at cinema at that time as well,
Yeah.
as we talked about a little bit already. Like, if you look at something like The Usual Suspects or Fight Club,
Yeah.
or I'm trying to think of another example.
I mean, even Seven kind of had a twist that...
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. You know, those are things perhaps because, you know, our generation now is still using those tropes, if you like, on the internet in terms of Twitter. Like, there is what's in the box is still very much something that you might see on Twitter these days.
It's a shame all these films have to have Kevin Spacey in them. Isn't it?
Yeah, well, but separating it from that, there was
Yeah.
something around that time where, as we talked about a bit already, people were ready to be challenged, essentially, with their mainstream cinema. Crucially, producers and filmmakers were ready to deliver that.
Yeah,
to them.
absolutely.
How do you do, children? I'm your new nanny.
Are you going to leave us too?
Why should I leave you?
The others said they wouldn't, but they did, and then it happened. Why have you opened the curtains? It was Victor.
You told your brother that there was someone else in the room.
There was.
That'll do, Anne.
I've seen them too. Sooner or later, she'll see them. Then everything will be different.
What do you want?
They're everywhere. They say this house is theirs.
Children!
Come here!
Run!
Can't you hear it? There's someone there.
So let's move on to The Others then, the brilliant The Others, which came out a couple of years later. And I think it was kind of slightly overshadowed still by The Sixth Sense. I remember when it came out and there was a lot of kind of, if you liked The Sixth Sense, you'll love this kind of a thing. But it's this wonderful kind of gothic story, much more kind of old-fashioned ghost story in comparison to The Sixth Sense. So it's set in this big, old, empty, creaky house in the middle of Jersey in the Channel Islands at the end of the Second World War. Now, Jersey was occupied by the Nazis, so it was very much kind of cut off from the rest of the UK. And this house is very much cut off from the rest of the island. It's kind of surrounded by woods and this mist. And you've got Nicole Kidman's character. She lives alone in this house with her two children. Her two children have this strange illness, this condition where they're extremely photosensitive and they're allergic to light. They're allergic to daylight. So they have to live in darkness. Anywhere the kids go, all the curtains have to be closed and all the lights have to be turned down, and they live in sort of low candlelight, which is just fantastic. So it creates this incredible mood, this creepiness, and also this kind of madness and isolationism that Nicole Kidman feels in having to live with her children in this darkness. And at the beginning of the movie, these three visitors arrive. You've got a maid, a cleaner, and a gardener. They arrive at the house and they're given a job working at this house. And it turns out they've lived and worked in the house before, and they knew the previous owners, so they know the house very well. And as the story then continues, we start to grow maybe a little bit suspicious of these visitors. Are they something other than they say they are? But then also, as we learn a bit more about Nicole Kidman's character and her kids, it feels like something's going on there as well. They talk about how Mummy went mad one day. And where's the dad? He went off to war and he never came back. The mother is extremely pious and a little bit unhinged. And so we start to basically question every single character in this house and every single character's motives. Meanwhile, things are going bump in the night. There seem to be other people inside the house. The little girl says she keeps seeing this other little boy called Victor, who is running around and opening all the curtains and therefore endangering the kids. So as the story progresses, we start to learn more and more, is this a haunted house movie? Is this psychological? Are there ghosts in the house? And then, spoiler alert, the big twist is Nicole Kidman and her children and the 3 helpers are all dead. They are the ghosts, and the family that are quote-unquote haunting them are actually real. They're a family that are trying to live in this house and are being haunted and harassed by this other family that keep closing the curtains and causing all kinds of problems for them. It's a wacky kind of 2 families living under the same roof type tale, really, isn't it?
Coming to BBC 3 in autumn. The Others.
I know, it does feel a bit like that. It's like Randall and Hopkirk or something. Yeah, it's so yeah, I mean, what's your relationship like with this movie? Do you remember when you first saw this one?
I think I probably saw this later on, so when I was in university, so in my early 20s. I don't remember this film being quite so slow. And
interesting.
It's a real churner. And there's nothing wrong with that at all, because it earns it and it pays it off at the end. Yeah. But it does take a long time to give you the details you need to stay invested in the story, particularly in the first half an hour, I'd say. Yeah. And I think that's because of its heritage. I think it's paying tribute to a strand of filmmaking that was, as you said, in the 50s and 60s was very popular, particularly. And it's taken that tone and that mood and that pace on as well. So you have to go into this realizing that it's going to take a little while to get going, I think. But I don't remember particularly the first time I saw it. I just remember being massively impressed by the twist. Yes. And the idea that ghost stories are layers upon layers. Yeah. And that both this film and The Sixth Sense are about a reckoning with death, right? In a way that we don't do in the West very much, particularly. In acknowledging that death is there, acknowledging that the dead have something to say to us still, whether it's literally through the medium of a ghost that you see on screen or through looking at our history and learning about what we've done before through that, or what we're about to do through that. And I just, the idea of psychological trauma being something that expresses itself as a physical manifestation is very rarely done this well, I think. And it's really put out there brilliantly.
It really is, And I think, I mean, the difference is, I suppose, that I guess, this does feel much more like a gothic horror movie, like you say, and maybe that's where we differ in that, for me, I'm absolutely just relishing and like bathing in this amazing house, this production design. I love from the first minute. I love it, that film. No matter how many times I watch it, I love the fact that they give you this setup where the children are allergic to light, and so everywhere they go, they have to close the curtains. They're walking around with candles. The house itself is scary. There's this kind of mist around it. I love it, absolutely love it. And I think I'm so involved in the performances and the production design and everything that it never feels slow to me for some reason. But you're right, it does. It takes a long time to get going in a way.
Yeah, it does. And I'm going to make myself sick through superlatives, but Nicole Kidman in this is just astonishing. It's like one of the best performances she's ever done. And that's saying something for an actor of her caliber.
Yeah.
But I have breakfast at 8, the children at 9, lunch will be served at 1, and dinner at 7:30.
The master, ma'am.
The master went off to war a year and a half ago. I've had no news since the war ended. Which of you does the cooking?
I'm so sorry, ma'am.
Which of you does the cooking?
She's just wonderful in this, particularly as she's playing, now looking back on it, what seems like quite I mean, she's traumatized, so it's understandable that she's so hysterical all the time. But if you compare her character to Bruce Willis in The Sixth Sense, he's a stoic big guy who's intelligently pulling apart what's going on in front of him, partly because of his personality and his character, but also because he's Bruce Willis as a man cast in an alpha role. Whereas in this, she is a so-called, I hate this term, strong female character.
Yeah.
But she totes a shotgun a lot of the time, all that kind of like physical, like violent manifestation of strength, I guess. But she's very, very squeaky, squally, waily as well. And the fact that she manages to play that and still keep you with her, keep us on side, feel emotion, feel sympathy for this woman who it turns out murdered her kids, and it becomes quite evidently is unhinged even before you learn that. It's just an astonishing film. It's really, really good.
It just feels so real. It just feels like such a real person, like you say, even though it is quite hysterical at times. But you see all these shades of her, and there are times where you don't like her, even before you find out she's murdered her children.
She's incredibly dogmatic about religion, for example.
She's so pious.
Like hugely strong Roman Catholic upbringing. She's putting this on her kids, and the massive difference between right and wrong. And it's obvious later on that this is because she has done the ultimate sin herself. She is somebody who is beyond redemption. And it's only later on with this film that you see what result that has on her.
So you both would have lied to the point of denying Christ. Oh, you'd have saved your heads being chopped off by the Romans, that's true. But what would have happened afterwards?
When?
In the next life. The one that's waiting for us after we die. Where would you have gone?
Oh.
Where, Nicholas?
To the children's limbo.
What is the children's limbo, Anne?
One of the 4 hells.
Actually, weirdly frustratingly with this film, I think once the twist is revealed, you need more. Like, I need to see what the effect of committing a mortal sin and then killing yourself as a staunch Roman Catholic, what effect that has on her as a ghost living in that house, because it's implied that she and her children are going to live there forever. And it's given the Hollywood ending almost of, well, we can be together now on a truthful level playing field where we've all understood what happens to us and has processed that trauma. Actually, surely that's where the trauma starts. Or maybe that's implied too.
Well, it's really interesting, isn't it? I think it gives you a bit of both, because I was thinking that, is this movie pretty actually very anti-Catholicism and religion? But then also, they talk all about, don't they? Oh, where do children end up in children's limbo? And are they basically in children's limbo?
And the girl asks the question, are we in limbo now? And she said, I don't know. And that probably, you're right, it probably is the hell of all hells. It's not being sure if this is it for you forever.
They're just stuck forever. It's so good. But it does kind of leave you to make your own mind up about it. And it doesn't, I mean, I suppose it kind of has it does have the Hollywood ending of like, okay, at least we're together and we've accepted it and we'll move on. But it doesn't feel like as much of a kind of schmaltzy ending as The Sixth Sense had, does it? I mean, it's got a real kind of underlying, okay, so it turns out she shot her kid or shot herself, smothered her kids, end. It's like, wow, it's pretty dark stuff, really.
I guess in that sense, The Sixth Sense's ending is much more of a classic Christian religious ending. In that he does imply that he's going to leave her and ascend, as dead people have done for decades in filmmaking of that sort, up to the better place, wherever that would be. Which is, depending on your belief system, for me it feels like poor narrative. It doesn't matter if you believe it or not. Whereas the others, you're right, there's a lot more uncertainty, a lot less black and white, and therefore that is the hell itself, right? The knowledge that now what you did in the past, you can never escape that. Your kids know it too, presumably are never going to get older because they're ghosts as well, as are you. And you have to live together with that knowledge forever. It's, it's amazing.
I mean, what did you think of the sequence in the middle where Christopher Eccleston turns up? I mean, I know that's a bit where a lot of people kind of, it loses them.
It's strange that so the husband comes apparently seems to come back from the war.
It's the one time, isn't it, when she says, I'm leaving the house, because the help always keeps saying, no, there's too much fog, and she goes, no, I'm going to do it. And we finally might see what goes on outside the boundaries of this house, and she gets so far into the mist that she gets lost, and then her husband turns up, so she goes home again. It's like, and
then later on we find out that he died in the war anyway, so he's another ghost coming back as the war dead, if you like, to I guess to help her have the revelation of what she did.
It's a little bit odd.
He prompts her to think again about why the house is empty in the first place.
That's true.
And she needs that romantic personal connection to really kick her into gear, I think. And it's only after they make love that she starts to really think about what happened in the past. So, sex cures everything.
Exactly. What she really needed was to get laid. That's what that movie was saying.
No, you didn't see that in The Sixth Sense. No, but I do think he's slightly out of the film, which is it is odd, his appearance, and it's not unrealistic for the world, because he essentially just lies in bed shell shocked for 15 minutes, then decides that he's going to leave again.
Yeah.
Hugs his kids, kisses his kids, essentially says goodbye to the family and,
Yeah.
and buggers off. But yeah, I think he is needed as a narrative crowbar, essentially,
That's
to
probably
lift
what
her
it
into
is.
a new part of the film.
That's what it is, isn't it? Yeah. And it's like, I suppose it raises more questions as to like, well, where are they then? And why is he suddenly turning up now? Has he just died? I mean, is this like, and where's he going beyond this? You know, it's an interesting one.
Tell me if there is someone upstairs.
There, in that junk room.
You've got slightly more traditional scares in this movie, slightly more classic and haunted house style scares, but they're executed so well. I mean, a couple of my favourites, you've got the moment where the little boy is running around in the spare room that has the piano and all of the different kind of statues and bits of furniture that are covered in white sheets. I mean, it's a classic kind of thing, but it's terrifying. The way that the piano keeps opening, the door keeps moving.
She's what?
And again, when you watch that scene again, knowing the twist, you see that scene in a whole different light, which is what's so wonderful about it. What do you think, though? Were you affected by this? Did you find it scary?
No, it did scare me, particularly the scene where she leaves her daughter in her confirmation gown.
Yes.
And she's playing with puppets, and then she comes back into the room, and the daughter has turned into this old woman.
What's the matter?
Where is my daughter? What have you done with my daughter?
Are you mad? I am your daughter.
It still has her daughter's voice, but obviously Nicole Kidman's character is terrified and starts to shake the old woman, throw her around to kind of say, where's my daughter? Bring her back. Then the daughter reappears. As unsurprised to everybody, it turns out it's the daughter all along. But things like that, I mean, it's the bit that the tired old people are terrifying trope, in the same way as young girls are terrifying trope. But it's genuinely scary, and the mood is scary. Nicole Kidman is scary in it. She's fully committed to being terrifying.
I think that's what it is, isn't it? Because you're right, it has got the cliches. It's got the scary child ghost, it's got the scary old lady, but it turns out that actually the only scary character is Nicole Kidman.
And that's as it's designed to be.
Yes,
right?
the
person who goes ahead and smothers their kids with a pillow is the scariest person in the room.
Yeah, she's the baddie. No one else is really. Yeah, that's the thing. So it is interesting, and again, that is well played. And again, I think it's one of those clips that has been shown to death. But it is still so well done. And again, it's not that kind of jump scare reveal. It's that kind of slow realization that it's a different hand or whatever.
Great kids in this film.
So good.
I've got her name written down.
Oh, have you? Great, because I have not.
Alakina Mann.
Yeah.
Playing the daughter. She's just brilliant.
Yeah, she is.
And the boy's good as well. The character's name's Nicholas. I forget the actor's name.
Yes, he's brilliant. So cute. Yeah,
really cute. And he's the eye of innocence of the film. He's the pure slate who never really had a chance to be anything but, because his mother took that away from him. And that is terrifying and sad in itself. But the daughter is just at that age where she's starting to question the authority of everything that her mother's teaching her. Naturally, and is starting to realise that her mum isn't looking out for her. And of course the tragedy is that she'll always be that. And she'll never be able to fully realise that as a normal teenager / adult would, and move away and break free of that influence. She's always going to be with her mum, pushing against that, realising that her mum made the ultimate decision to snuff her out. And she's never going to break free from that. So the more you think about this film, the more you realise what a tragedy it is. It's not just a ghost story or a horror. There's a real element of familial drama and horror in that.
Absolutely.
You're stuck together. Can you imagine being stuck with your family for the rest of your life?
I know. Thank God they've got those other lovely three, the gardener and the... what did you think of those three?
So it's Eric Sykes.
It's Eric
brilliant.
Sykes.
I love it.
It feels a little bit random, a little bit like he's in a different film to everyone else, but
I mean, he just bimbles around, really, doesn't he? I'll be off to do the garden.
Like the other woman will say something and then he'll just go, oh yes,
Something, Mr. Tuttle. I think I've reached the end of my tether. What about you?
Oh, yes. Definitely.
Fionnula Flanagan, who did a lot of work on Star Trek,
Right.
before she was.
Oh, cool.
She's done feature work as well, but she's a big character from Star Trek. I believe. Yeah, she's really great because she has the moments where Nicole Kidman's character is supposed to show her emotion.
Yes.
It's supposed to show that she's still a human being despite all of this.
Yes.
And she really elicits a great response from Nicole Kidman for that. But it's very much a supporting role in that she's just there to prompt.
She's needed for that device, isn't she? Yeah, and she kind of... but it is interesting because she's kind of what you believe as the sort of the only sort of sane, trustworthy one into then, actually, is she a sinister...
Yeah.
You know, is there something shifty about her?
And it quite cleverly does the double twist on us, right?
Yes.
Because it sets up the twist that the 3 housekeepers are dead.
Yes.
As the twist that we're going to see. And then the last 5, 10, 15 minutes gives you the main twist, which is that the lead character, the narrator, the untrustworthy narrator, as it turns out, is dead all along.
Yeah, all of them are.
So it's a double-decker thing. Yeah, and that works really well.
Yeah.
I just wondered if... I don't know if it would add anything to make those characters a bit richer, but maybe it would have done.
I think you're right. Yeah, definitely. The thing I love about those characters is the look of them. I mean, the main 3, especially, and those 2 kids. You know, they're so cute and they're so brilliant. But you look at them and they're so pale, and they often wear, like, the girl wears this sort of white dress, and you think, in any other movie, you know, that if you flip it to the other point of view of Victor, these are 2 terrifying ghost children that you would see in most other horror films that kind of stand at a window or whatever. But it's because we're aligned with them rather than the real kids. It's like
totally that.
And it's so brilliant because they have that look of terrifying ghost children, but also we get to know them and love them, and they're so brilliant, you know. So it's I
mean, it's humanizing the inhuman, right? Which is always going to be interesting. And it's thinking about now, it's interesting that they're all families of 3s as well. The 2 kids and Nicole Kidman, the ghosts are 3, and then the family that come in who are potentially going to buy the house, also known as the Intruders, are a father played by Keith Allen, which is amazing.
Yes. And the mother is
she's in Game of Thrones.
She's Catelyn Stark from Game of Thrones.
And then the boy Victor. So it's almost like this unit of 3 is important. Again, the religious angle there, I guess. And I love the idea, to kind of go back to what we talked about right at the beginning about this film, of those layers. Like, my girlfriend loves this word, the palimpsest.
What does that mean?
It means layers of culture upon layers of culture. Okay. So if you look at London, there were other buildings there, but there'll be elements of the older buildings showing through all that stuff. Yeah. So the layers of these ghost stories all stacked on top of each other. Yeah. The implication being that other people will move into that house and die and become another set of ghost stories that are then run through. Yeah. And if you don't, I don't believe in ghosts personally, but I do obviously believe in history, and I believe in that we see stories all around us that are linked to things that are no longer here, or people that have died.
Links to the past.
And you can't escape those, obviously. You can't live in a society or even live on the world without being close to a dead body. Yeah. That's interesting in itself, and ghost stories reflect that at their best, don't they?
Absolutely,
the idea that death is all around us. Yeah. It's just there, but for the grace of God go I.
Yeah, and it's that chilling thing of, that moment in the film where they see that what is it, the Book of the Dead, where they have those portraits. There's something really chilling about that, isn't there, as well? I love it. I love all that kind of era, that look, that style, and those pictures are terrifying, And
it's interesting how these films make you misremember as well, because I remember clearly Nicole Kidman's portrait popping up in that book.
That there would be some sort of revelation.
That she's been dead all along. So these are pictures of people that they used to basically take photos of in state and show respect to the dead by dressing them up in their Sunday bests and lying them out and having a photo album of them. Yeah. And you see that the 3 ghosts in the story, the obvious first tier ghosts, are in that book, and that's the big reveal.
Yes, that's right. Yeah,
but in terms of Nicole Kidman's character, I clearly remember seeing a picture of her in that book, but it never happened. So again, my brain has kind of created a film around the film, which is kind of odd.
Yeah, it's so true. Yeah, you're right. I think I thought the exact same thing. Yeah.
And the Nazism is interesting as well. Yeah. The fact, like, there is so she says that I think she says that Jersey was invaded by the Nazis. I should know.
Did you know? And I only found out this because I went to Jersey recently, but I had no idea Jersey was occupied by the Nazis.
Really?
They surrendered.
Know that.
It's something that I think we're ashamed to know about. Yeah. We've never been taught that, but if you go to Jersey, there is still old kind of, there's still stuff. There's an old hospital building that has swastikas on it and stuff. It was a peaceful occupation, but they just surrendered. Wow. Yeah.
Well, she says in the film to Christopher Eccleston's character, everybody else surrendered. Everybody else complied. Why didn't you? Why did you go off to war again? Yeah. Why did you keep fighting? Yeah. So, there's a massive weight of guilt there, right, as well, and that comes into it.
That's a huge ghost story.
Yeah,
thing,
and it's not just a Roman Catholic thing. It's the fact that she gave in to an occupying force of such evil.
She let evil in, basically. Yeah.
And again, even though that's a huge weight to put on that character. Is it really her fault that everything that happened to her afterwards happened?
No.
I wonder,
Yeah.
But there is an element of her both being complicit and an engineer of her own fate in that sense.
Yeah, totally. And I think it just adds to that Jersey setting or Guernsey, is it Jersey or Guernsey? But it's that setting in the Channel Islands is just it's so isolated, isn't it? And it's like that part of our country that you almost forget about a little bit, don't you? You know, and it's just out there on their own, and there's that real sense of isolation with them. Yeah, it's brilliant. Yeah. So overall, then, what again, did this movie sort of live up to sort of repeat viewing for you, rewatching it?
Not so much as The Sixth Sense did, but I think that's just my taste, to be honest.
Absolutely.
Like they are equally great films.
Yeah.
I just prefer the Poppy and the Serial. If
Absolutely.
it's like The Sixth Sense is something that is digging into a big bowl of Cocoa Pops that you can just scoff in one sitting, and it's easy to eat and digestible and bad for you, probably. But it's got some intellectual weight to it as well.
And it's much more
what it is.
in some ways. They're both character dramas, but I suppose you could regard Sixth Sense much more as a character drama, whereas the others you can't escape that it is this big gothic haunted house. It's this big cobwebby, dark, candlelit, classic ghost story.
I mean, the others is clearly made by a better filmmaker.
Yeah,
right? You look at in terms of the whole production, you look at the set design, the costume design's brilliant.
Amazing.
They're not realistic 1940s dresses that Nicole Kidman's wearing, because they're very kind of cinched and they look nicely tight around her body to make her look vaguely sexy as well, which is troubling in itself.
Yeah, it's weird.
But the costumes look amazing. She looks like Grace Kelly.
Yeah.
There's an element of this such a strong strain of classic cinema within it that The Sixth Sense probably lacks. But I think that's both a credit and a detriment to
Exactly,
Sixth Sense.
yeah,
It doesn't have that kind of extra sheen of almost has an 80s feel to it rather than a classic Hollywood
The
film.
Sixth Sense was doing something new. It was a game changer. It launched a whole new thing, whereas the others didn't. I don't think it really made waves at all, the others. I feel like it's been one of those movies, like a lot of classics, that has grown over time, word of mouth and that kind of thing. I had to look up, it didn't make a fraction of the money as The Sixth Sense. It was one of those movies that I think a lot of people, poster quotes and stuff said, if you liked The Sixth Sense, you'll like.
Oh yeah.
Because it's got a twist and it's about ghosts. Yeah. So that's the thing. But it wasn't a game changer. It kind of does a lot of what these old movies from the 60s and 50s did, but it just does them so well.
Yeah.
That's the thing. Yeah. So good. Brilliant. Well, before we finish, I ask everyone this, but you're not a horror fan, you've already said that, but what is your favourite horror movie? Do you have a favourite horror movie?
I think my favourite horror film is probably 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Oh, good. Yeah. Would you consider that a horror movie then? Interesting.
It's really difficult, isn't it? I always think people are being a bit too highfalutin when they're like, I don't believe in genre. All this kind of, it's a bit of everything. But genuinely, that film is, that film's horrific, isn't it? Film is, the message of that film is essentially we're alone in the universe and that there's no one there to help you.
Yeah.
And is there anything more horrifying than that thought that no one's going to be there to get your back?
Yeah, so true. There's something I was talking about this with Danny Lee as well, because we were talking about The Shining, obviously, but there's that element of all of Kubrick's films that is terrifying. That is so cold, and also just the images and the atmosphere and the music and the feel of them. 2001 has horror elements to it, definitely. Everything that he's done has.
But also not to get too deep or even too maudlin. Like there is an element of beauty to that as well. The idea that you just leave everything behind. And that you are, and I say this as a young person who's healthy, so it's very, very easy for me to say that. But there's an element of nihilism is interesting and exciting in itself, and I think that's what Kubrick was tapping into, particularly in his time as well. The world was racing so fast in terms of how it had before, technological advancement, societal advancement, and the ultimate fears have never really changed. The fact that you're going to be wiped out along with everybody else, and nothing you do or say makes any difference anyway. And that is the depth of most horror. Whereas I'd say like probably a slasher film is much more about the visceral, there's a knife going into flesh.
Absolutely.
These films are about
It's the ideas,
How
isn't
can
it?
we twist your brain into pieces?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, brilliant. On that cheery note, thank you so much for joining me. First of all, and just tell people where they can find, BFI podcast and other stuff that you're involved in.
Yeah, so please come and check out the BFI podcast. We're on SoundCloud if you search for the BFI, and we're also on. We have to say Apple Podcasts now, don't we?
Yes, I say iTunes every week. I forget
all the time.
Yeah,
anyway.
yeah.
So we're on that. I link to everything on my Twitter, which is Henry H Barnes.
Perfect.
Also check out bfi.org for the latest events, etc. that we're involved with.
Amazing, and including some videos made by me.
And some
on there.
videos, yeah. They're all right.
Yeah, they're all right. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mike.
And that's it for this week. Thank you so much for listening, and a huge thank you to this week's guest, Henry Barnes. Now, don't forget, Henry hosts the BFI podcast. You can find that on iTunes. Please do subscribe and check it out. It's a brilliant podcast. Henry is a brilliant presenter and journalist, and I'm not just saying that because I have to, because he's my boss. He really is. I was always a fan. So please do check that out. So what did you think of this week's show? What do you think of The Sixth Sense and the others? Do they still hold up all these years later? Do they still hold up upon rewatch, even if you know those twists? Get in touch with us. The email address is evolutionofhorror@gmail.com. You can find us on Twitter, that's @evolutionpod, or on Facebook, that's facebook.com/evolutionofhorror. So next week, well, I'm very excited. Two of my personal favourites are going to be covered on next week's episode, back to back. Joining me to discuss these movies is a brand new guest. She is the film critic for The Independent, and she's also appeared on BBC's Film 2018. She also fills in for Mark Kermode on Wittertainment on a regular basis. The brilliant Clarice Lockery will be here, and she'll be discussing two of her favourite ghost movies with me. One of them Mexican, one of them Spanish, both incredibly sad and moving, but both incredibly frightening. I'm talking about The Devil's Backbone from 2001 and The Orphanage from 2007. One of them directed by the great Oscar-winning Guillermo del Toro, and the other one produced and plugged by the great Oscar-winning Guillermo del Toro. So we'll be discussing Del Toro and Del Toro's oeuvre quite a lot next week, along with these two movies, which we will be discussing in spoilerific detail. Can't wait. Please do join me then for all of this and more on the evolution of horror.